and we've got Phil Thomson from Auror. Where's Phil? Please welcome to the stage. Crime fighter.
Awesome, thanks Justin, and it's a pleasure to be here tonight and I suppose sharing our journey towards AI and how we're helping to fight crime right around the world. Before we get into all the fun stuff, I thought I'd just give a little bit of background on who we are and what we do. We're founded here in New Zealand, and the problem that we first saw was around retail crime in particular. And retailers here were losing $2 million every day to shoplifting, theft and fraud, and about $100 billion a year around the world. I'm a little bit desensitized to those numbers, but if you think about $2 million a day, if a bank was robbed every day for $2 million, people would be a little bit up in arms, right? But it happens in small chunks right across our communities, and no one bats an eyelid. So we thought that was a pretty interesting problem of how do you apply technology to that to transform the way that people can report, solve and prevent crime. We had pretty humble beginnings, 4 Countdown stores out in West Auckland. 2014, we are now working with retailers right around the world and have over 10,000 stores we're now working with to help them. The team itself has grown to 50 people right across New Zealand, Australia and the US. And our R&D product engineering team was all based here in Auckland, so exporting to the world. From day one, we partnered with Microsoft. We're very deliberate around our technology partner and who we want to work with. And importantly for this talk, actually it was the right choice on how we can leverage their investments to help with AI and ML. So we started, crime is such a big problem, right? It's been around forever. We started looking and focusing initially on the problem of reporting crime. What we found was that it's just ridiculously underreported right around the world, and retail crime in particular. It happens every day. It's high volume, often low value. So we wanted to help retailers who are capturing a fraction of that crime themselves and sharing even less with police. If you can capture more information and in a structured way, that sort of paves the way for things like AI. There was no point starting with all the cool stuff in the tech without that base and that foundation to actually then build upon. So we started by focusing on building the best way for retailers to report crime. In doing so, we've managed to focus on the user experience and user interface to make it enjoyable and actually provide feedback loops for them to encourage them to do more and properly capture what's actually going on in the communities all around us every day. In doing so, we ended up shaving more than 30 to 45 minutes off their individual reporting process, getting it down to about 4 minutes to do an entire report, including evidence, video footage, images, reporting it to the police electronically. There's a change in the game around how we're actually capturing and using that information. I think our first real experience with AI came about from a customer problem. So we've been working with Z Energy, and obviously we can help them report crime, but that's not the end game, right? How do you actually solve and, more importantly, prevent crime before it happens? So for Z, their main problem was that people would come in, fill up their cars, drive off without paying. And they were starting to play around with ANPR, automatic number plate recognition technology, to try and help them stop that. So when you look at ANPR, you can break it down to a few components. You've got object detection, so a vehicle is now in frame. You've got optical character recognition, so saying what are the characters on that number plate. And then in the background, you've got machine learning to actually go, how do we train the model to be better and more accurate? New Zealand's a great example where we have slashes through our zeros, different from other countries around the world. So how do you train a model to get better at recognising that that is a 0 rather than O or an 8? The other problem that they also faced was subjectivity and bias. Unintentional, but if a car drives into a forecourt, the attendant there has to just decide whether or not they want that person or will allow them to take fuel. And if you think about it, they're generally basing it on, does that person look dodgy? Do I think that vehicle looks dodgy? Or is that vehicle's number plate on a post-it note on my screen to tell me that it has been dodgy in the past? So there's an interesting problem for us is how do you try and solve that whole process around making it a better experience for customers and safer and better experience for staff as well. So I want to try something really quickly with all of you. Put yourself in the shoes of an attendant going about doing your daily job. A car comes in, person hops out of it. Do you give them fuel? You've got 3 seconds to pick a person that you think is going to steal from your petrol station right now. 3, 2, 1. Who did you choose? 2 things you should know. Number 1, whoever you chose, you're probably statistically wrong. Number 2, all those faces are not real people. And the theme of this talk, they're all actually generated by AI. But what I'm trying to help you understand is that if this is happening hundreds of times a day for a person in a store, it's really, one, it's unfair on them, and 2, they're going to get it to a bad result. You're going to end up with complaints from customers. Why did you switch me to prepaid? Why can't I get my fuel? And ultimately, it's going to end up with regrets on both sides. So we worked on how could we solve that process and how can we actually integrate our platform around generating intelligence and the right information with technology like AI and ANPR to get a better experience. So now when a car comes in, or 16 cars at the same time, good luck figuring that one out, we can instantly tell the attendant at that station if that car's been involved in a previous incident. For them, it's absolutely game-changing. They don't have to think or be subjective to their customers coming in, and they have a better overall experience. What Zed actually found was in the first 12 months, they had a 50% reduction in crime across all their sites, and a 70% reduction in customer complaints, which is massive. Well, after this project, it gave us a bit of a chance to reflect on where we'd come from a technology point of view, where we were going, and whether or not what we'd built was in line with our aspirations for growth and scale in the future. What we ended up working towards was deciding that actually, no, probably isn't, and it's not uncommon for a company and a startup to do that. Theoretically, it's a pretty easy answer, but practically making that decision to rebuild an entire platform is hard. But I think after 5 years of building and changing and adding things on and taking on customer feedback, you end up with a pretty ugly baby. Does a great job, but how is that actually going to grow and scale in the future? So in 2018, we made a pretty important decision that we wanted to rebuild the entire platform from the ground up using technology. We went out and spoke to a whole lot of different vendors in market. We ultimately ended up choosing Microsoft to continue with us. And there's sort of 3 things that, for us, made it a bit of a no-brainer. The first was their moving to that sort of platform as a service offering. And bearing in mind when we first started, Microsoft Azure was still a pretty new thing, right? But they were doubling down on that and putting a lot of effort and time into that, which then led into the second thing around cognitive services. So actually, how can we start leveraging their investment in that so we didn't have to build necessarily a separate AI team, but actually our developers and engineers could utilize that within the Azure environment. And then thirdly, and really importantly, I think we had really aligned approaches around things like privacy and how to use data for good and technology for good, which was important to us and a partner. So it took us over 18 months to rebuild and sort of get back to square one where we were at, but knowing that we'd then be able to start leveraging these new technologies. And I think over the first few years of us operating, the technology landscape, both software and hardware, just changed so much. It was just so important for us to make sure we were on that journey going forward. Otherwise, we would miss the opportunity to be able to scale internationally. And speaking of privacy, this is probably worthy of a talk on its own. So I'm going to sort of gloss over the high level, but I think it's important that, for us, privacy is a foundational building block of everything we do. We take a privacy by design approach, which means that from design, development, build, everything, we're always thinking through those steps as a team around how is this going to impact on things like privacy, and then looking at the more macro global trends around privacy legislation, how that's changing, how we're ahead of the game, both for ourselves, but actually importantly for our customers who rely on us as a provider to help them comply with those things. So we have 4 privacy by design principles that we use. Data minimizations, how do we capture the least amount of data possible? Transparency, so how do we be really open around what we do and why we do it? We also want to be secure, goes without saying. And then lastly, we want to use data for good. So making sure that we can have a positive impact on the community and actually maintain trust with our customers and with the public as well. Which all of that meant that we actually ended up building a privacy and information sharing framework within the platform, which would allow us and our customers to use that to scale, and then also be across things like changes in legislation and making sure we're protecting it. And we've taken the same approach around now we're at the point of investing more and more time into new technology, taking that same stance on how do we make sure that AI and ML actually is going to be used for good and compliant with privacy. So this sort of culminated last year in what we called Innovation Week for the team. Middle of COVID, we wanted to bring a little bit of joy to the team and to our customers. So this is a bit of a hackathon on steroids, right? We had a full week. The entire engineering team was involved, so it was a pretty big investment from the company. There was only a couple of criteria, which was it has to be using some new technology, and it has to be looking at solving a customer problem or an enhancement to our platform. So it was quite specific around that stuff, but everyone came up with their own ideas. They ended up self-selecting into teams, and we ended up with about 10 projects over that week. They actually built full working prototypes within that week and presented it back to the company. What we saw was pretty amazing, and we wanted to actually share that with our customers and prospects for feedback and actually just go, hey, look, this is what's possible these days. So we sort of took it to the world and actually let our engineers talk to our customers, which isn't very common. But as a side note, our customers loved it. They don't get a chance to talk to the people behind the software, to ask what they thought were tough technical questions around AI and what people were doing with technology. And on the flip side, our engineers loved the opportunity to actually do that and take what they'd built and share it in their own way with our customers. There's a couple of out of the 10 projects, we sort of highlighted 3 or 4 of them, and all of those ones that are used AI within them. So you're looking at things like image recognition, so what's a person wearing in a photo, trend analysis, is Manuka honey theft spiking in the last 2 weeks? True story, it does happen here in New Zealand a lot. You're looking at predictive modelling, and then also things like face redaction, and that's a really cool example of the fact that, again, you're using this AI and this technology for reasons of privacy. So in this case, we're identifying multiple faces within an image. And this might be a CCTV image with a suspected offender in it with multiple witnesses or people in the background. How could you automatically block out all those other faces to actually retain and preserve their privacy rather than them being involved without knowing it in a photo like that? So that was just a really awesome opportunity to use it for good. Where are we going with it all? Some of those ideas we're actually now in the process of implementing within our platform and working closely with our customers to make sure that they will actually add value and do things in the right way to actually share them out with our customers. We're also really keen to continue being proactive around wrapping privacy and policy and process around new technology. I think there's been a lot of examples in the last 18 months where it's just gone horribly wrong because people enjoy playing with new tech, try things out, capture 3 billion photos from the world, give them to police. It can go the wrong way really quickly. So I think being thoughtful, and I think anyone in technology in particular that's using this sort of technology, just thinking through what those sort of second order effects are, I think it's really important. And then lastly, we're continuing to innovate, and ultimately it's around how do we use that technology to help solve and prevent more crime across our communities, and ultimately for us it's actually about making our communities safer and reducing harm. So we're kicking off a project with Microsoft in the next, I think 6 weeks or so now, looking at, again, how we use this new technology that they're bringing through to help with those more serious problems. So that's sort of a very quick lightning talk of what we're doing, what we're up to in the tech space. We've also got some of the Auror team here in the background. Rob, our VP of Engineering, is here. If you have any tough technical questions or want a job, talk to Rob. And thanks for your time, and appreciate having us here.